The Grand Council Hall of Velsara was the most powerful place in the known galaxy. It was not a building. It was a world inside a world. The hall was so large that clouds formed near the ceiling. The floor was made of black stone that came from a dead star. Every wall was covered in the flags of over 300 alien species. The lights inside were soft and golden, but they did not make the place feel warm. Nothing could make that place feel warm. It was cold. It was serious. It was full of power. And today, something important was happening. The Grand Summit had begun. Every 5 years, the most powerful species in the galaxy sent their best diplomat to this hall. They came to talk about peace, about trade, about war, about borders. They came to make deals. They came to show strength. They came to remind each other. We are watching you. Security was everywhere. At every door there were guards. Big ones. The kind of guards that looked like they were carved from rock. The Krath warriors stood at the main entrance, 7 feet tall, 8 feet tall, some even 9. Their armor was dark red and black. Their weapons were long and glowing. They did not smile. They did not blink. They just stood there like walls made of muscle and metal. The Druvani guards were different. They had 4 arms, each one ending in 3 sharp fingers. They moved slowly, but everyone knew. They could move very fast when they wanted to. Their eyes were always scanning, always watching. The Serathi guards floated above the crowd, their bodies wrapped in energy fields that crackled quietly like lightning in a bottle. They were the most expensive security in the galaxy. Having Serathi guards meant you were rich and serious. Every major delegation had brought warriors, soldiers, killers dressed in armor and titles. This was normal. This was expected. This was the game. You came to the Grand Summit with strength. You showed your power before a single word was spoken. Your bodyguards were your first message, your first sentence, your first warning to every other delegation in the room. Bring big guards. Bring scary guards. Bring guards that make others think twice. That was the rule. Everyone followed it. Almost everyone. The great doors of the hall opened for the 42nd time that morning. The crowd inside barely looked up anymore. They had seen 41 delegations already. Big ones, small ones, colorful ones, terrifying ones. The excitement had faded. Now it was just routine. But then someone noticed. One of the Druvani diplomats looked toward the door. She tilted her head. Her 4 eyes blinked slowly, one after the other. She said nothing. She just watched. Then the Krath delegate at the main table looked up. Then the Serathi ambassador turned. Then, one by one, like falling leaves, the attention of the entire hall moved toward the entrance. Ambassador Voss of the Velhari people walked in. He was not impressive to look at. That was the first thing people noticed. He was small, even by Velhari standards. His body was thin, and his skin was pale blue, with thin lines of darker blue running down his neck like rivers on a map. He wore simple gray robes, no armor, no weapons visible. He walked with a calm, quiet step, like a man going for a morning walk, not like a diplomat entering the most dangerous room in the galaxy. The Velhari were known for being smart, for being careful, for choosing their words like a surgeon chose a knife, slowly, precisely, always for a reason. They were respected, not feared. There was a difference. But that was not why people were staring. People were staring because of the figure walking beside Ambassador Voss. One guard. Just one. And it was a human. The human's name was Marcus Cole. He was not tall, not by Galactic standards. He stood at about 6 feet, which made him shorter than almost every guard in the room. He had dark brown skin, short black hair, and 2 eyes that were a very calm, very still shade of brown. He wore no shining armor, no energy shield, no glowing weapons. He wore simple dark clothes, a jacket, pants, boots. There was a small sidearm holstered at his hip and a blade on his other side. Both weapons looked almost embarrassingly basic compared to the weapons carried by every other guard in the hall. He walked slightly behind and to the right of Ambassador Voss. His hands were loose at his sides. His face showed nothing. No fear, no excitement, no nervousness. His eyes, though. His eyes moved constantly, Slow, calm sweeps of the room. Left to right, high to low, doorway to ceiling, guard to delegate. Back again. He looked to most of the aliens watching, like a small, soft, completely unimpressive creature. The laughter started quietly. It began as whispers. A low sound, like wind through leaves. A few Krath warriors exchanged looks and made a sound deep in their chests that was the Krath version of a laugh, a slow, rolling rumble. The Druvani diplomat covered her mouth with one of her hands, but her other 3 hands were shaking slightly with suppressed amusement. Even some of the smaller, normally polite species were struggling to keep their faces neutral. One human. One small, soft, unarmed-looking human as a bodyguard. The Velhari ambassador had lost his mind. Or maybe this was a joke. Some kind of cultural joke the Velhari were playing. Yes. That had to be it. By the time Ambassador Voss reached his delegation's table near the center of the hall, the whispers had grown into something that could no longer be called quiet. Multiple conversations had started. Multiple eyes kept drifting back to Marcus, who walked to his position behind the ambassador's chair and stood still. Just still. Arms loose. Eyes moving. Face like stone. The loudest reaction came from the Krath table. The Krath delegate was named Vorruk. He was one of the largest beings in the hall, nearly 9 feet tall, with a body built like a machine designed for violence. His arms were as thick as most beings' torsos. His neck was so wide it barely existed. His head seemed to sit directly on his shoulders like a boulder on a cliff. His armor was the color of dried blood, and it was covered in markings, each one a record of a battle won, an enemy defeated, a world brought to submission. Vorruk had fought in 11 wars. He had won all 11. He looked at Marcus Cole and felt something he had not felt in a very long time. He felt like laughing. Not a small, polite laugh. Not a quiet chuckle. He felt like throwing his head back and laughing until the golden lights in the ceiling shook. He controlled himself. Barely. Instead, he leaned toward his second, a slightly smaller Krath named Druvani, and said in a low voice that was still somehow loud enough for the tables around them to hear, "The Velhari have brought a pet." Druvani looked at Marcus and made the rumbling laugh sound. "A very small pet. Do you think it bites?" Vorruk asked. More laughter from the Krath table. Not quiet anymore. Ambassador Voss heard it. He said nothing. He sat down in his chair, opened the small case in front of him, and began to arrange his papers with the careful, precise movements of a man who had done this many times before. His pale blue face was completely calm. Behind him, Marcus heard it too. His eyes moved to the Krath table. They stayed there for exactly 3 seconds. Then they moved on. The formal opening of the Grand Summit took 2 hours. There were speeches. Long ones, short ones, boring ones. There were introductions of each delegation. There were readings of the summit's rules. No weapons to be raised inside the hall, no threats to be made openly, all disputes to be settled through words and vote. Marcus stood through all of it. He did not sit. He was not offered a chair, and he did not ask for one. He stood behind Ambassador Voss's chair for 2 full hours, in the same position, with the same stillness and the same slow, constant scanning of the room. Several aliens found this unsettling in a way they could not quite explain. They had guards, too. Their guards stood for long hours as well, but their guards shifted their weight, scratched their armor, exchanged small looks with each other. Small movements, normal movements, signs of life. Marcus did not move unless his eyes did. It reminded some of them of something. Something from old nature documents they had seen about predator species on various worlds. There was a particular kind of stillness that a predator had when it was watching something. Not bored stillness, not tired stillness, ready stillness. But no, that was ridiculous. This was a human. Humans were from a small, unremarkable planet in a quiet corner of the galaxy. They had been spacefaring for only a short time. They were new. They were young. They were soft. Everyone knew this. The Krath delegate Vorruk looked at Marcus one more time during the lunch break and decided to settle the matter. He walked over slowly. His footsteps made a heavy sound on the black stone floor. Boom, boom, boom. The kind of sound that made smaller beings want to step backward without thinking about it. 2 of his Krath guards followed, because Vorruk always had guards behind him even when he was the most dangerous thing in the room. The conversations nearby quieted. People watched. This was going to be entertaining. Vorruk stopped 2 steps from Marcus. He was more than 3 feet taller. He looked down at the human the way a mountain looks down at a stone at its base. Marcus looked up. No step backward. No change in his face. His hands stayed loose at his sides. Vorruk spoke in Galactic Common, the shared language of the summit, so that everyone nearby could understand. "Little creature," he said slowly, "you are the ambassador's pet?" The nearby tables went quiet. Even the servers carrying drinks stopped moving. Marcus looked up at the 9-foot wall of armor and muscle in front of him. He took one small breath. Then he spoke quietly in perfect Galactic Common. His voice was calm, not aggressive, not nervous, just calm, the way deep water is calm, the way a very old, very heavy thing is calm. "No," Marcus said. He held Vorruk's gaze without blinking. "I am his warning." The silence that followed was a strange kind. It was not the silence of boredom. It was not the silence of confusion. It was the silence of a room full of very intelligent beings who had just heard something and were not completely sure what to do with it. Vorruk stared at Marcus for a long moment. The human did not look away. Vorruk was a being who had faced generals and warlords and beasts that could tear metal apart. He had stared them all down. He had never been the one to look away first. He looked away first, not because he was scared. He told himself that clearly, firmly, and immediately. He was not scared of this small, soft, unarmed-looking creature. He looked away because it was beneath him to stare at something so small for so long. That was the reason. That was the only reason. He made the rumbling Krath laugh again, quieter this time, and walked back to his table. But one of his guards, younger, less experienced, stayed a half step behind. His 4 eyes lingered on Marcus for just a moment longer, and he thought about those 2 words. His warning. Not his guard, not his bodyguard, not his protector. His warning. Like Marcus was not the solution to a problem. Like Marcus was the message before the problem arrived. The young Krath guard shook the thought away and followed his delegation back to their table. The afternoon sessions continued. Trade agreements, border discussions, alliance renewals. The work of the summit was slow and careful and very, very political. Ambassador Voss participated with the precision and patience he was famous for, speaking rarely, but when he spoke, people listened. The Velhari were respected for exactly this reason. Marcus stood and watched and said nothing. At one point, a small delegation from the Mivari, a bird-like species with hollow bones and bright orange feathers, passed close to Ambassador Voss's table. One of their junior diplomats, barely an adult by his species standards, slowed down and looked at Marcus with enormous curious eyes. "Are you really a human?" the young Mivari asked. His voice was high and light, like wind through feathers. Marcus looked at him. "Yes." "From Earth?" "Yes." The young Mivari tilted his head. His orange feathers ruffled slightly with what looked like amazement. "I read about Earth once. In a school file." He paused. "It said your planet was classified." "It is," Marcus said. "Why?" Marcus said nothing for a moment. Then, "Because of what lives there." The young Mivari blinked his large eyes. "What lives there?" Marcus held the young alien's gaze. "We do," he said. The young Mivari stood very still for a moment. Then he walked away quickly, his orange feathers pressed flat against his body the way they pressed when he was cold, or when he was unsettled. By the time the evening session ended and the delegates began leaving the hall, the story of Marcus Cole had spread to every table, every delegation, every guard standing at every door. The human who said he was a warning, most of them laughed. Politely among themselves away from the Velhari table, a small human claiming to be a warning. To the Krath, To beings with 4 arms and energy shields and ancient armor, a warning. How very strange, how very small, how very human. Ambassador Voss walked out of the hall at the end of the day with the same calm, quiet step he had used coming in. His papers were tucked under his arm. His pale blue face showed nothing. Marcus walked beside him. At the door, Vorruk was standing with his guards, saying something to the Druvani diplomat. He glanced over as the Velhari delegation passed. His eyes met Marcus's for just a moment. Marcus gave the smallest nod. Vorruk looked away first again. He did not think about it for the rest of the evening. Or at least, he tried not to. That night, in his private quarters, Vorruk did what he always did when something bothered him. He looked for information. He opened the Galactic Species Database, a tool every major delegation had access to for research purposes, and searched for humans. The file loaded. He expected the usual entry: home planet, population, technology level, diplomatic history. The dry, boring facts of a young, unremarkable species. Instead, the first thing that appeared on his screen was a symbol, a red triangle. Inside the triangle, white letters, Deathworld, Category 1. Vorruk stared at that symbol. He had seen it before, on files for worlds like Granthar, a planet with gravity so strong that most species' bones would crack just from landing. On files for Vesk Prime, a world covered in creatures that had evolved specifically to kill, over millions of years of brutal competition. He had never expected to see it here. He read further. Earth. Gravity, 1.0 standard, deceptive, as life adapted to it became structurally dense. Atmospheric composition, survivable for most species, but with bacterial and viral loads of extraordinary variety. Average temperature varied with extremes capable of killing unprotected beings within minutes. Predator index, extreme. He read the predator list, not the individual species, just the number. He stopped breathing for a moment. Then he read the line that the database had tagged with a small alert marker, the line that the database flagged as the most statistically unusual fact about Earth. The dominant species of this world did not evolve at the top of the food chain. They fought their way to the top. Over approximately 300,000 years, this species competed with, hunted, and outlasted every other predator on their planet. They are the only known Deathworld species to have achieved spaceflight. Vorruk sat back. He looked at the ceiling, and, very quietly in the darkness of his room, he asked himself a question he had never had to ask before. What exactly had he walked up to today? Across the hall, in the Velhari quarters, Ambassador Voss sat by a window looking at the stars. Marcus stood near the door, still, quiet. They laughed today, Voss said softly. Yes, Marcus said. Does that bother you? Marcus was quiet for a moment. No. Voss nodded slowly. He looked at the stars a little longer. They will not laugh by the end of this summit. Marcus said nothing, but the corner of his mouth moved. Just slightly. Just for a moment. Not quite a smile. Something older than a smile. The night on Velzara was long. The planet had 2 moons and both of them were big and close. They made the sky look heavy, like the darkness itself had weight. The lights of the Grand Council complex glowed softly below those moons, gold and white, steady and quiet. Most of the delegates slept. Vorruk did not sleep. He sat at the desk in his quarters and read. He read everything the Galactic database had on humans, on Earth, on the history of that small, quiet planet in a quiet corner of the galaxy that nobody had paid much attention to until now. The more he read, the less he slept. The database entry for Earth was not like other entries. Most species in the galaxy had clean, simple files. Homeworld, population, technology level, government structure, trade interests, threat assessment, usually low, medium, or high, with a short explanation. Earth's file was different. It was long, much longer than it should have been for a species so new to the galactic community. And it was full of small markers, little flags that the database system placed automatically when data was unusual, when numbers were outside expected ranges, When something did not fit the normal pattern, Earth's file had more flags than any file Vorruk had ever opened. He started at the beginning. Planet age, 4.5 billion years. Standard enough. Many worlds were that old. Life present? Yes. Complex life? Yes. Intelligent life? Yes. All standard. Then he reached the gravity section. Earth's gravity was listed as 1.0 standard units. The Galactic standard had actually been built around Earth's gravity, because when the first galactic scientists visited the planet long ago, they had used it as a reference point. It seemed unremarkable, normal, average, but there was a note attached, a long note. Vorruk read it slowly. Note: while Earth's surface gravity registers as 1.0 standard, the biological effect on native life is significantly greater than this number suggests. Life on Earth evolved under this gravity for billions of years, producing organisms with dense bone structures, compact musculature, and cardiovascular systems capable of sustained physical output at levels unusual for standard gravity worlds. In practical terms, an Earth native operating in standard galactic environments, most of which have slightly lower gravity than Earth, will experience a permanent passive physical advantage. Their muscles and bones, built for Earth, function as if enhanced in most other environments. Vorruk read that paragraph twice. Then he moved on. The atmosphere section had another flag. Earth's air was breathable by most galactic standards, yes. Oxygen and nitrogen, nothing exotic. But the biological section attached to the atmosphere entry was not about the air itself. It was about what lived in the air, and the water, and the soil, and on every surface of every object on the planet. Earth hosts an extraordinary diversity of microscopic life, bacteria, viruses, fungi, and other organisms, numbering in the trillions of unique varieties. Most of these are harmless to Earth's native species. Many are beneficial. However, for non-Earth species, exposure to Earth's microscopic ecosystem without proper protection could be immediately dangerous. Earth natives carry this ecosystem with them at all times. Crucially, Earth's dominant species, Homo sapiens, has co-evolved with this ecosystem for hundreds of thousands of years. Their immune systems are among the most complex and aggressive biological defense systems recorded in the Galactic database. They do not simply resist infection. They adapt to it, remember it, and respond with increasing efficiency upon repeated exposure. Translation: humans get sick, and then they get better, and then they never get sick from that same thing again. Vorruk leaned back in his chair. He thought about the diseases that had devastated his own people over their history, the plagues that had killed millions. Even now, with all of Krath medicine and technology, a new pathogen could be catastrophic. Humans had faced thousands of such plagues across their entire recorded history, and they were still here. He kept reading. The predator section took the longest. Earth had been classified as a death world, not because of its gravity or its microbes or its weather, though all of those things contributed. It had been classified as a death world primarily because of what lived on it. What had lived on it? What had competed on it for millions and millions of years in a biological arms race so brutal and so constant that the creatures it produced were almost unbelievable? Vorruk read the predator list slowly, one entry at a time. Large feline species, ambush hunters, capable of speeds that would catch most beings off guard, strong enough to bring down prey many times their size. Large canine species, pack hunters. They did not rely on one powerful attack. They followed their prey, for hours, sometimes days. They ran and ran, never stopping until their prey was exhausted and could not run anymore. Large bear species. Vorruk stopped at this one. The database said these creatures could weigh up to 800 kilograms. They could run faster than most beings could sprint. They could climb, they could swim, and they were listed as omnivores, meaning they did not even need to kill to survive. They killed because something was in their way. Then there were the aquatic predators, the ones that lived in Earth's oceans, which covered 70% of the planet's surface. Vorruk read about creatures the length of military vehicles with jaws strong enough to crush metal, about things that glided silently in dark water and were almost invisible until they were already on top of you. The planet, he realized, was not just dangerous. It was comprehensively dangerous. It was dangerous on land, in the water, in the trees, underground. It was dangerous in summer and in winter, in deserts and in forests and on mountains. And Homo sapiens, humans, had lived on this planet, had survived on this planet, had competed with all of these creatures, and won. Not by being the strongest, not by being the fastest. The database was clear on this. Humans were not the strongest species on Earth. Not even close. They were not the fastest. They could not see as well as many of Earth's predators. They could not smell as well. They did not have natural armor or natural weapons. No claws worth mentioning. No venom. No thick hide. They were, by pure physical measure, quite average. And they had won anyway. There was a section in the database specifically about this. An analysis written by a Velhari xenobiologist 40 years ago, included in Earth's file because it had been considered the best explanation anyone had managed. Vorruk read it carefully. What makes Homo sapiens remarkable is not any single physical trait, but rather a combination of traits that, together, create something that has no parallel in the Galactic database. First, endurance. Humans cannot outrun most predators in a short sprint, but they can run longer than almost any other creature on their planet. They sweat, releasing heat through their skin, which allows them to keep moving long after other species would overheat and stop. There is a hunting method called persistence hunting, practiced by early humans, in which a human would simply follow an animal for hours, sometimes an entire day, running slowly but never stopping, until the animal collapsed from exhaustion. Then the human would walk up to it. Second, adaptability. Humans can live in almost every environment on Earth. Desert, Arctic, rainforest, mountain, coastline. They do this not through biological adaptation, which takes thousands of generations, but through behavioral and technological adaptation. They make tools. They make clothes. They make shelters. They figure out how to survive in places they were never biologically designed to survive in, and they do it within a single generation. Third, the mind. Human intelligence is not unusual in the galaxy. Many species are highly intelligent. What is unusual is how humans use that intelligence in high-stress situations. Most intelligent species, when faced with extreme fear or extreme danger, experience a reduction in complex thinking. The threat response overrides higher function. Humans do this too, but they have evolved an unusual capacity to override their own threat response, to continue thinking clearly when they should be panicking, to plan when they should be running. This is possibly the most dangerous thing about them. Vorruk stopped reading. He sat in silence for a long moment. Then he thought about something. He thought about Marcus Cole standing in the Grand Council Hall for 2 solid hours without sitting, without moving, without complaint, just watching the room with calm, steady eyes. He thought about what that now meant. The next morning, the Grand Summit continued. The hall was full again. Same delegations, same tables, same careful political conversations happening over breakfast before the formal sessions began. Marcus was at his position before anyone else arrived. He had eaten, a small meal, alone, before the hall opened. He had stretched quietly in the corridor outside. He had checked his equipment twice. Then he had walked to his position behind Ambassador Voss's chair and stood there, waiting. Several of the delegates who arrived early noticed him and quickly looked somewhere else. The story of the night before, of what Vorruk had found in the database, had not spread yet. But something had changed in the air. A small thing, subtle. The laughter from the day before was quieter this morning. Ambassador Voss arrived and took his seat. He greeted the nearby delegations politely, exchanged the formal pleasantries of diplomacy, and opened his case. He noticed Marcus was already in position. He did not comment. He never did. The Druvani diplomat, the one who had covered her mouth with amusement the day before, passed close to the Velhari table and slowed down slightly. She looked at Marcus with a more careful expression than she had worn yesterday. Not afraid, not yet, just more careful. Marcus met her eyes briefly, then looked away. She moved on faster than she had intended. It happened in the middle of the first formal session. The morning agenda was about resource rights, a complicated debate between three species over mining claims in a shared star system. It was the kind of debate that went in circles for hours. Voices rose, voices fell, papers were pushed across tables. Marcus was watching the room, not the debate. The debate was not his concern. His concern was everything else. Every door, every guard, every face, every hand. He had mapped the hall the day before. He knew where every camera was. He knew where every guard was stationed. He knew the 3 fastest ways out of the hall from Ambassador Voss's current position. He saw it before anyone else did. A figure near the side corridor, one of the service staff, carrying a tray of drinks, moving normally, walking at a normal pace, nothing wrong on the surface. But Marcus had been watching the service staff all morning. He knew their routes, he knew their timing. He knew which doors they used and in what order. This one was slightly off. Not obviously off, not dramatically off. Just one small deviation from the pattern. A half step too far to the left. Eyes pointing slightly wrong, not at where he was going, but at the Velari table. At Ambassador Voss. Marcus was already moving before the figure had taken 3 more steps. He did not run. He did not shout. He walked quickly and smoothly, cutting across the room in a diagonal line that looked almost casual to anyone glancing over. He reached the figure in the service uniform, just as the figure was reaching into the tray. Not for a drink, but for something beneath the drinks. What happened next took 4 seconds. That was all. 4 seconds. And it was over. Marcus had the figure's arm locked, the hidden object, a small, compact device, the kind that could cause significant damage at close range, removed and secured, and the figure face down on the floor with a knee on their back. All of this without a word, without a shout, without any movement that looked like panic. When 2 security officers arrived, they had been watching the cameras and finally caught up to what Marcus had already handled. The figure was already restrained and calm. The device was already safe. One of the security officers looked at Marcus, then at the figure on the floor, then back at Marcus. "How did you—" she began. "Side corridor," Marcus said. "Check it. There may be a second one." There was. The security team found a second figure waiting in the side corridor. Back up, in case the first attempt failed. They were detained without incident, largely because Marcus had told the security team exactly where to look and how to approach before they had even started moving. The whole event lasted, from Marcus's first movement to the corridor being cleared, less than 4 minutes. Ambassador Voss had not moved from his chair. He had continued sitting through the debate, calm and still. When it was over, he turned slightly in his chair, just enough to look at Marcus, who had returned to his position. "Thank you," Voss said quietly. "Yes," Marcus said. That was all. But others had seen. Not the full picture. Most of the hall had been focused on the resource debate, and had only caught fragments of the movement near the side corridor. But fragments were enough. Fragments spread. And by the lunch break, the full story had assembled itself from all the different fragments and traveled from table to table across the entire hall. The human had spotted an assassin that the hall's professional security system had not caught. The human had stopped 2 operatives alone in 4 seconds, without raising his voice or drawing his primary weapon. The human had then, and this was the part that made even the most skeptical delegates pause, told the security team where the second operative was before the security team had any idea there was a second operative. At the Krath table, Vorruk ate his lunch in silence. Dravak, his second, sat beside him. "It could be luck," Dravak said. Vorruk said nothing. "Or training," Dravak added. "Even a small species can be trained." Vorruk put down what he was holding. He looked across the hall at Marcus, who was standing behind Voss's empty chair. Voss had stepped out for a private conversation, still watching the room. "I read about humans last night," Vorruk said. Dravak looked at him. "And?" Vorruk was quiet for a moment. "Their planet is classified Deathworld, Category 1, Dravak blinked. That is the highest classification. Yes, but they are so small. Vorruk thought about the database entry, about persistence hunting, about immune systems built from surviving thousands of plagues, about the capacity to keep thinking clearly when everything inside you is screaming to run. Yes, he said again, they are small. He picked up what he had been holding and continued eating. But his eyes did not leave Marcus for the rest of the lunch hour. The young Krath guard from the day before, the one who had lingered on Marcus's words, had done his own reading the night before, less thorough than Vorruk's. He had not read the full database entry, but he had found one thing that had stayed with him. A record, a personal service record. Not classified but not easy to find. It required access to military exchange files that the Krath delegation had through a mutual defense agreement with another species. Marcus Cole, age 34. Enlisted at 18. Combat deployment on 6 different worlds. Specialized in close protection, hostile environment operations, and the young guard had not known this was a military specialty until he saw it listed. Something called persistence tracking. He had looked that up separately. Persistence tracking was a method used by human military operatives in situations where a target needed to be followed without being detected over long distances and long periods of time. It was based on an old human hunting method, one where the hunter simply followed and followed and followed until the target could not continue. The record had other things in it: awards, commendations, mission summaries that were mostly classified but had brief, visible descriptions, hostile extraction, no casualties, protective operation, multi-vector threat, 0 principal injuries, field operation, survival conditions, duration 14 days, 14 days in the field, alone, or close to alone, on a hostile world. The young Krath guard read that last one 3 times. Then he looked across the hall at Marcus Cole, who was standing completely still, watching the room with calm brown eyes. The young guard thought about what it would take to survive 14 days alone in a hostile environment. He thought about what kind of mind and body that required. He thought about how a being who had done that once, and then done it again on other worlds, would look, standing in a council hall surrounded by beings who were laughing at him. He would look exactly like this, the young guard realized. He would look calm. Because he was calm. Because almost nothing in this hall was as difficult as the things he had already survived. The young guard straightened his posture slightly and looked away. That afternoon, during a short recess between sessions, a Serathi ambassador floated close to the Velhari table. The Serathi were old. Their civilization was one of the oldest in the galaxy. They did not say things without meaning them. The Serathi ambassador hovered beside Ambassador Voss and spoke in a quiet, careful voice. "Your guard." "Yes," Voss said. "He saw the operative before our scanners did." "He is very observant," Voss said simply. The Serathi ambassador was quiet for a moment. Their energy field crackled softly. "Our scanners are not simple technology. They are among the best available." "I know," Voss said. "How did he—" "He watched," Voss said. "He noticed a pattern. Then he noticed when the pattern changed. The Serathi ambassador processed this. He memorized the patterns of your entire security environment in one day." Voss looked at the Serathi ambassador with his calm, pale blue face. "In one morning," he said, gently correcting. The Serathi ambassador floated in silence for a moment. Then they said something that Voss had not expected, from a species as old and proud as the Serathi. "We would like to speak with him, privately, with your permission." Voss considered this. Then, "You may ask him. He will decide for himself." At the end of the second day, the Grand Council Hall emptied slowly. Marcus walked out beside Ambassador Voss. Same position as before. Same quiet step. Same scanning eyes. At the main doors, Vorruk was standing again. This time his guards were a step further back than yesterday. And Vorruk himself stood differently, still large, still powerful, still armored in dark red and black. But something in his posture had shifted. Something small. Something that, on a Krath, was actually quite significant. He was not standing the way he stood in front of things he considered beneath him. As the Velhari delegation passed, Vorruk did not make the rumbling laugh. He did not speak at all. He simply watched. Marcus, as they passed, looked at Vorruk once. Just a brief, direct glance. No challenge in it. No aggression. Just acknowledgement. One being recognizing another. This time, Vorruk did not look away first. He met the look, held it for a moment, and gave the smallest, almost invisible nod. Marcus nodded back. They walked on. That night, Vorruk opened the database again. He found the section he had skipped the night before, the part he had closed out of without reading, because he had already felt unsettled enough. He opened it now. It was titled, Behavioral Notes, Combat and Survival Psychology. He read slowly. Humans are unique among known intelligent species in their relationship to danger. Most intelligent species evolved in environments where intelligence was an alternative to physical confrontation. Thinking replaced fighting. Humans evolved in an environment where thinking and fighting were required simultaneously and continuously for hundreds of thousands of years. As a result, the human psychological response to danger is fundamentally different from most galactic species. Where others become less capable under extreme stress, humans often become more focused. They describe this themselves in various ways. Time slowing down, thinking becoming clearer, awareness becoming sharper. There is no precise galactic term for this. Humans call it different things in different languages. In their most common language, one term used is being in the zone. Perhaps most unsettling to outside observers, humans appear to find certain levels of danger comfortable. Not all humans, not universally, but consistently enough to be statistically significant. Beings who have spent years in high-danger environments, soldiers, explorers, emergency responders, often report that calm, low-danger environments feel wrong to them. Uncomfortable. Like something is missing. In other words, some humans are most themselves when things are most dangerous. Vorruk closed the file. He sat in the dark for a long time. Then he thought about the human standing in the Grand Council Hall. The one who had stood completely still for hours and hours. The one who had looked completely calm during the most important and potentially dangerous summit in the galaxy. The one who had, when asked if he was the ambassador's pet, responded with two quiet, completely calm words. His warning. Vorruk thought about those two words for the rest of the night. By morning, he had stopped thinking they were funny. The third day of the Grand Summit began like the first two. Quietly. The delegates arrived. The guards took their positions. The servers moved through the hall with their trays. The golden lights above hummed softly. The black stone floor reflected everything. The lights, the flags, the faces of 300 species gathered in one place to talk about peace. Everything looked normal. Marcus knew it was not. He had known since the morning. Since before the hall had even opened. Since he had done his first walk of the perimeter at 6 in the morning, 2 hours before anyone else arrived, checking doors and corridors and camera angles the way he always did. Something was different. He could not point to one thing. That was the problem with this kind of feeling. It was never one thing. It was 10 small things, each one so minor that alone it meant nothing. Together they meant everything. A door that had been left unlocked the night before and should have been locked. A service panel in the east corridor that had been opened and closed recently. The dust around its edges disturbed. A guard rotation that had changed slightly from the previous 2 days, in a way that created a small window. Just a few minutes. On the west side of the hall, near the emergency exits. Small things. Marcus noted all of them. He told no one yet. He needed more information before he spoke. A wrong alarm was almost as bad as no alarm. It made people stop listening. He went to his position behind Ambassador Voss's chair and stood. And he watched. And he waited. The morning sessions were tense. The resource debate from the day before had not been resolved, and now a fourth species had joined the argument. Voices were louder than they had been. At one point, the Krath delegate Vorruk slammed one massive hand on his table, not aggressively, just for emphasis, and the sound echoed through the hall like a small explosion. Everyone flinched. Everyone except Marcus. His eyes had moved to Vorruk's hand for exactly half a second when the sound happened. Threat assessment. Automatically, instantly, and then moved on when the threat registered as 0. Ambassador Voss leaned back slightly in his chair and said, to no one in particular, in a voice too quiet for others to hear, "The Krath are frustrated." "Yes," Marcus said from behind him. "That is usually when mistakes happen," Voss said. "Yes," Marcus said again. Voss nodded once and returned to his papers. At the morning break, Marcus moved. Not obviously, not in a way that drew attention. He walked the perimeter of the hall slowly, the way a guard does when he is just checking his area. He stopped at the east corridor and looked at the service panel again. He crouched slightly and looked at the floor near the panel. Marks on the floor, faint. The kind of marks left when something heavy had been moved carefully, slowly, by someone who did not want to leave marks but could not avoid leaving them entirely. Marcus stood up. He walked to the west side of the hall. He found the spot where the guard rotation had the small window. He stood there for a moment and looked at the emergency exit door. He looked at the ceiling above it. He looked at the walls on either side. Then he took out a small communication device, personal, encrypted, not part of the hall's official system, and sent a single message to a contact he had established on the first day. A security officer named Preva, who worked the overnight shift and had shown in 2 days of observation that she was competent and careful and not connected to any of the delegations. The message was short. East Corridor Service Panel 7. West Emergency Exit, Ceiling Mount. Check both. Do not announce. He put the device away and walked back to his position. Preva checked both locations during the break. She found the first device in the East Corridor, small, flat, attached to the inside of the service panel. She did not touch it. She photographed it, noted its position, and moved on. She found the second location more difficult. The ceiling mount above the west emergency exit looked normal at first. She had to use a scanning tool, quietly, with no announcement, to find what was hidden inside the mount. It was not a device. It was a small access point. Someone had cut a passage no larger than a hand through the ceiling material and disguised it with a cover that matched the original surface exactly. She stood below it and thought about what that meant. Someone was planning to come through that ceiling. She sent Marcus a message back. 2 words. "You are right." Marcus received the message. He did not change his expression. He did not change his posture. He continued standing behind Ambassador Voss's chair as the delegates returned from the break and took their seats. Inside, he was running calculations. The devices in the East Corridor were likely meant to create a distraction, something that would draw security attention to the east side of the hall. When security moved east, the team coming through the west ceiling would have their window, clean, fast, targeted. This was professional work, not opportunistic. This had been planned before the summit began. Someone had come in early, days early possibly, and prepared. The target could be anyone. But Marcus looked at the positions, thought about the angles, thought about where the west emergency exit was relative to the tables in the hall. It was closest to 3 delegations, the Krath table, the Serathi table, the Velhari table, his table. He sent another message to Preva. "Prepare 4 officers. Hold them outside the west corridor. Wait for my signal. Come fast when I send it. No announcement until then." He put the device away. He had no way of knowing when it would happen. Could be this session, could be the afternoon, could be the closing ceremony on the final day. Professional teams were patient, so Marcus was patient too. He stood. He watched. He breathed slowly. He waited. It happened at the start of the afternoon session. The hall had just settled. Delegates were in their seats. The formal session was being called to order by the session moderator, a tall, thin being from a neutral species whose only job was to manage the summit's schedule. The lights went out. Not slowly, not gradually, All at once, every light in the Grand Council Hall, the golden overheads, the wall panels, the reading lights on the tables, cut out simultaneously. The hall went from bright and warm to completely, absolutely dark in less than a second. For a moment there was silence. Then the noise began. It started as surprise, sudden sharp sounds from beings who had not expected this. Then it became something louder, something more complicated, as 300 delegates and twice as many guards all reacted at the same time in the dark. Chairs scraped. Something fell. Someone shouted in a language Marcus did not recognize. A guard somewhere activated an emergency light, a single beam cutting through the dark, which somehow made everything more confusing rather than less. The Krath guards at the main entrance activated their armor's internal lighting. Red light. It turned the hall into something that looked like the inside of a nightmare. Shadows moving in every direction, red light catching the edges of armor and weapons, the sound of hundreds of beings trying to figure out what was happening. In the chaos, 4 things happened that most people in the hall did not notice. The east corridor produced a sound, dull, contained, the sound of a device doing what it was designed to do. Smoke began to roll out from the east corridor entrance. Not dangerous smoke, concealment smoke. But it did exactly what it was designed to do. Every security camera in the hall that was on emergency power swung toward the east corridor. Every guard who had a radio heard the call. East corridor. Possible device activation. All units respond. Half the security force moved east. The west emergency exit suddenly was very quiet, and in the ceiling above it a small panel moved. Marcus was already there. He had moved the moment the lights went out. Not toward Ambassador Voss, not yet. First he had to know where the threat was coming from. He had moved in the dark with no light, no hesitation, because he had spent the last 3 days memorizing this hall the way he memorized every space he worked in. He knew how many steps from Voss's chair to the west wall. He knew the exact position of every table, every pillar, every obstacle. He moved through the dark hall while others were still reacting, and he reached the west emergency exit in 9 seconds. He heard the ceiling panel move above him. He pressed himself against the wall beside the exit door. Not in front of it, not in the open, against the wall where the darkness was deepest and where someone dropping from the ceiling would not immediately see him. He waited. The first figure dropped from the ceiling. They landed quietly, trained, clearly, and immediately moved to one side, making room for the next one. They were wearing dark suits with visual dampeners, technology designed to make them harder to see in low light. They had weapons drawn, small, compact, professional weapons. The second figure dropped, then the third. They had a target. They were moving toward it, toward the Velhari table, which Marcus could see now because Voss had activated a small personal light, the kind kept for emergencies. It threw a small circle of pale blue light around the Velhari table. It made Voss visible. It made him a target. The 3 figures were moving. Marcus moved first. What happened next was difficult for the few people who saw fragments of it to describe afterward. The darkness helped. Most of what Marcus did happened in shadows, quickly, without sound except for the necessary sounds. The first figure went down before they realized anyone was close to them. Marcus had come from the wrong angle, from the wall, from the side, from a direction that did not match where any guard should have been standing. The figure went down and stayed down. The second figure turned at the sound, a small sound, barely anything, and found nothing where they expected something to be. Marcus had already moved again. He was somewhere else. The figure turned again. Marcus was behind them. The second figure went down. The third had heard enough to be dangerous. They raised their weapon. In the dark, they were pointing it in approximately the right direction. Approximately was not enough. Marcus was not where they were pointing. He was low. Below where any being of similar height would naturally aim. He had dropped to a crouch the moment the weapon came up, reading the trajectory, reading the hands, reading the small movements that always preceded a shot. He moved under the line of fire. The third figure went down. 4 seconds, that was all. Marcus straightened up. He checked all 3 figures quickly, down, secure, not going anywhere. He took their weapons. Then he sent the signal to Preva. 12 seconds later, 4 security officers came through the west corridor door at a run. They found 3 figures on the floor and 1 human standing calmly in the dark, holding 3 weapons he had taken from people who had not managed to use them. One of the officers stared. Marcus handed the weapons over and said, "East corridor is a distraction. These 3 are the real team. There may be a 4th. Check the ceiling access point for anyone who did not come down yet." There was a 4th. Still in the ceiling, waiting. They had heard something go wrong below, and frozen. They were found without incident. The lights came back on 8 minutes after they had gone out. The hall was still in various stages of chaos. Delegates grouped together, guards everywhere, conversations happening in a dozen languages simultaneously. The smoke from the east corridor had been dealt with. The emergency was technically over, though most of the people in the hall did not know that yet. Ambassador Voss was sitting in his chair. The small emergency light was still on in front of him, though it was no longer necessary. His papers were still on the table. His hands were folded in front of him. His pale blue face was completely calm. Marcus returned to his position behind the chair. Voss did not turn around. He said quietly, "How many?" "4 total," Marcus said. "All secured." "Anyone hurt?" "No." Voss nodded slowly. He reached out and turned off the small emergency light. "Thank you," he said. "Yes," Marcus said. The hall took a long time to settle. The formal session was suspended for the rest of the afternoon while security conducted a full sweep of the building. Delegates stayed at their tables or gathered in small, tense groups. The air in the room had changed. The careful, political tension of the previous days replaced by something rawer and more immediate. Someone had tried to attack the summit. Someone had planned it carefully, prepared it in advance, and executed it with professional precision. And it had failed. Because of one being. The story moved through the hall the way fire moves through dry grass, fast in every direction at once. Fragments first, then full accounts as the security officers who had arrived at the west exit described what they had found. Then the account from Preva, who had received Marcus's warning that morning and had checked the locations he identified. Then the account from the officer who had found the 4th figure still frozen in the ceiling access point. 1 human. No special armor. No enhanced weapons. No backup. 4 professional operatives in the dark with weapons drawn. 4 seconds. The Druvani diplomat sat at her table and listened to the account from one of her guards who had been near enough to see fragments. When the guard finished, she was quiet for a long time. "He knew," she finally said. "Apparently," her guard said. "He knew this morning, before it happened." That is what the security officer said. He sent the message hours before the lights went out. The Druvani diplomat looked across the hall at Marcus, who was standing in his usual position with his usual expression. "He saw something we did not see," she said quietly. "Something our scanners did not catch. Something our guards did not catch." She paused, and he said nothing publicly. He did not cause a panic. He simply prepared. Her guard said nothing. "That," the Druvani diplomat said softly, "is not the behavior of a bodyguard." "What is it the behavior of?" her guard asked. She thought about it for a moment. "A hunter," she said. At the Krath table, Vorruk sat in complete silence. His guards around him were talking about the attack, about the security failure, about what species might have been responsible. Normal conversation. The conversation of soldiers processing an event. Vorruk was not processing. He was watching Marcus. He had been watching since the lights came back on. He had been trying to understand something. Not the tactical details. Those were impressive, but Vorruk understood tactics. He had spent his life in tactics. What he was trying to understand was something else. He was trying to understand the expression on Marcus's face, or rather on the lack of one. After an event like this, after taking down 4 armed operatives alone in the dark, any Krath warrior would show something. Pride, if they were confident. Relief, if they were honest. Energy, the hot, buzzing energy that came after a fight, that took time to leave the body. Marcus showed nothing. He stood behind his ambassador's chair and watched the room with the same calm, steady eyes he had used all day. His breathing was normal. His hands were loose at his sides. He looked, if anything, slightly more relaxed than he had in the morning, like the danger had been restful. Like whatever had been slightly wrong in the air this morning, that feeling of something building, had been resolved. Like the situation had returned to a state that Marcus found comfortable. The most dangerous things in the world, Vorruk had learned over a lifetime of war, were not the ones that fought with anger. Anger was readable. Anger had patterns. Anger made mistakes. The most dangerous things in the world were the ones that were calm in the middle of it. He thought about the database entry from 2 nights ago, about what it had said. Some humans are most themselves when things are most dangerous. He looked at Marcus Cole standing in the restored golden light of the Grand Council Hall, relaxed and still and watchful. He understood now. He finally, completely understood. Druvani leaned close to Vorruk and spoke quietly. He did it alone, 4 of them in the dark. Yes, Vorruk said. Our 2 best guards were in the east corridor when the distraction activated. They went where the danger appeared to be. Druvani paused. The human did not. No, Vorruk said. How did he know it was a distraction? Vorruk was quiet for a moment. He thought about persistence hunters, about creatures that followed and never stopped, about minds that had been sharpened for hundreds of thousands of years, not in libraries or universities, but in the dark and the wild and the difficult places of a death world. Because he thinks like they do, Vorruk said. Druvani waited. Whoever planned the attack thought like a tactician. Create a distraction, use the window, reach the target. Vorruk turned his cup slowly on the table. Marcus thought like the attacker. He found the plan before the plan moved, because he would have built the same plan. Druvani was quiet for a moment. That is a frightening way to think. Yes, Vorruk said. It is. He looked across the hall at Marcus one more time. Then he did something that Druvani had never seen him do in 11 years of service. He stood up from his chair, straightened his armor, and walked across the hall toward the Velhari table. Not with the swagger of yesterday, not with the deliberate heaviness of a being making a point about its own size and power. He walked the way a being walks when it is going somewhere with purpose and respect. He stopped in front of Marcus. Marcus looked up at him. Same calm eyes, same loose hands, same expression that gave nothing away. Vorruk looked down at the human for a long moment. 9 feet of ancient warrior and 1,000 years of Krath martial tradition, looking at 6 feet of quiet, still, watchful human. Then Vorruk did something that made every Krath guard at his table go absolutely silent. He lowered his head. Not a bow. Not quite. The Krath did not bow. But a lowering, a deliberate visible movement of the head and the upper body, a posture that in Krath culture meant one specific thing and had no other meaning. I see you. I recognize what you are. Marcus held his gaze for a moment. Then he gave a small single nod. The same nod he had given at the door the night before. Simple. Direct. Enough. Vorruk straightened up and walked back to his table. The Krath guards stared at their delegate. None of them spoke. At the Druvani table, the diplomat watched this exchange with 4 very wide eyes. At the Serathi table, the old floating ambassador processed it silently, their energy field crackling with something that might have been, in a very Serathi way, something close to emotion. At the Velhari table, Ambassador Voss had his back to the exchange. He was looking at his papers, but the corner of his mouth was moving. Just slightly, just for a moment. That same expression Marcus sometimes wore. Not quite a smile. Something older than a smile. Something that knew things. Something that had always known things and had simply been waiting for everyone else to catch up. The evening came slowly to Velzara. The 2 big moons rose together, filling the sky with heavy silver light. The Grand Council Hall began to empty as the suspended session gave way to private conversations and quiet meals, and the careful, private diplomatic work that always happened after something big. Marcus walked out beside Ambassador Voss at the end of the evening. Same position, same step. His eyes were still moving, checking the corridor, the exits, the faces of the guards at the doors. He did not stop until they were in the safe space of the Velhari quarters. Only then, in the quiet and the privacy of that room, did Marcus do something he had not done in 3 days. He sat down. He sat in a chair by the wall and stretched his neck slowly to one side, then the other. A quiet, small sound of relief. Voss looked at him from across the room. "Hard day," Voss said. Marcus thought about it. "Busy," he said. Voss almost smiled. "Are you all right?" Marcus rolled one shoulder slowly. "Yes." Voss nodded. He moved to the window and looked at the 2 moons. "Vorruk came to speak to you." "Yes." "What did he say?" "Nothing," Marcus said. He didn't need to. Voss was quiet for a moment. He looked at the moons. "Tomorrow is the last day." "Yes," Marcus said. "After today it will be different. The closing ceremony. Everyone will be watching everyone else differently." He paused. "They will be watching you differently." Marcus said nothing. Voss turned from the window and looked at him. "Does that bother you?" Marcus thought about it for a moment. A real moment. An honest one. "No," he said finally. He looked at the wall across from him. His eyes were steady and calm and very, very old in the way that some eyes got when they had seen enough of the world to stop being surprised by it. "Let them watch," he said quietly. Outside, the 2 moons moved slowly through the silver sky, and the galaxy, one delegate at a time, was learning something it would not forget. The 4th day began differently. There was no loud talking in the corridors, no casual laughter between delegations, no servers moving quickly with trays of morning drinks while guards stood half asleep at their posts. Everything was quieter, more careful, more aware. The Grand Council Hall of Velzara had survived an attack. A serious, professional, well-planned attack. And the attack had been stopped not by the hall's security system, not by the armored Krath warriors at the entrance, not by the Serathi energy fields, or the Druvani 4-armed guards, or the dozens of expensive, highly trained soldiers standing at every door and corner. It had been stopped by one human, one quiet, still, watchful human, who had seen the plan before the plan moved and had handled 4 armed professionals in 4 seconds in complete darkness. By morning, every delegate in the hall knew the full story. Every guard knew it. The servers knew it. The moderators knew it. The story had traveled through the entire complex during the night, carried by whispered conversations and urgent messages, and the simple, unstoppable movement of information through a building full of very intelligent, very attentive beings. And by morning, the way people looked at Marcus Cole had changed completely. He noticed it the moment he entered the hall. He always arrived before the delegates. He always did his morning walk first, checking the perimeter, noting anything different from the night before, mapping the day's security layout in his head before anyone else was moving. Today, the guards at the main entrance stepped back slightly when he approached. Not dramatically, not obviously, just a small, instinctive movement. The kind of movement a body makes before the mind has decided to make it. Marcus noted it, said nothing, continued inside. The overnight security team was finishing their shift. 2 of them saw Marcus come in and straightened their posture. One of them, a young Druvani barely older than a junior officer, gave a formal salute. Not required, not protocol, just something that came out naturally. Marcus gave a small nod and continued his walk. He checked the east corridor first. The area around Service Panel 7 was clean. Preva's team had done thorough work the night before. The panel itself had been sealed with a new lock. The floor around it was clean. He moved to the west side. The ceiling access point had been discovered, documented, and permanently sealed overnight. New cameras had been installed, covering angles that the previous system had missed. Preva had done that too, and she had done it well. He stood at the west emergency exit for a moment. Yesterday, in the dark, 4 people had dropped from that ceiling with weapons and a plan. The floor looked ordinary now. Clean black stone, quiet golden light coming in from the corridor. Marcus looked at it for a moment, then he turned and continued his walk. Ambassador Voss arrived at his usual time. He walked into the hall and took his seat with the same calm, unhurried movement he always used. He arranged his papers. He accepted a drink from a server. He greeted the nearby delegations with the careful, precise politeness of a Velhari diplomat who had been doing this work for 30 years. Marcus took his position behind the chair, and the hall noticed. It was not one look. It was many, from different directions at different times, lasting different lengths. Some were curious, some were careful. Some were the long, assessing looks of beings recalculating something they thought they had already understood. The Krath table looked. Vorruk met Marcus's eyes once across the room and gave the small nod. The same one from the night before. Marcus returned it. The Druvani diplomat looked. She held the look for a moment, then turned back to her papers with an expression that was harder to read than usual. The Serathi ambassador floated at their table and looked. Their energy field crackled softly. They looked the longest. Even the small delegations, species that had mostly stayed quiet during the summit, watching from the edges, looked. Some of them had never paid much attention to the Velhari table before. Now they looked at it the way you look at something you realize you misjudged. Marcus watched the room. Same as always, same slow, calm sweep. Left to right, high to low. Door to ceiling. Face to face. Same eyes. Same stillness. Different room. The morning session was the beginning of the closing proceedings. The Grand Summit had 3 days of debate and 1 day of resolution. The final day, when agreements were signed and commitments were made, and the summit's work was formally completed. It was the most ceremonial day, the most watched. Every delegation put on their best presentation for the closing day. The resource debate had been quietly resolved overnight through private negotiations. Something about the attack had apparently made 3 species decide that their border disagreement was less important than it had seemed. The remaining agenda items moved through the morning with unusual efficiency. At midday, the moderator announced a short recess before the afternoon's closing ceremonies. That was when the Serathi ambassador came to the Velhari table. The Serathi were not a species that made casual visits. They communicated carefully, deliberately, with full awareness of what every action meant and how it would be read by observers. When a Serathi ambassador left their table and floated across the hall to another delegation space, it meant something. Everyone in the hall understood this. The hall got quieter as the Serathi ambassador crossed the room. Ambassador Voss stood when they arrived, the appropriate greeting for a species as old and senior as the Serathi. He inclined his head. The Serathi ambassador's energy field shimmered in return. Ambassador Voss, the Serathi said. Their voice was layered, 3 tones happening simultaneously, the way Serathi voices always were. We asked to speak with your guard 2 days ago. You said he would decide for himself. Yes, Voss said. The Serathi turned toward Marcus. Marcus waited. We have been watching you, the Serathi said directly. No diplomatic softening. The Serathi were too old for softening. Since you arrived, we watched yesterday. We reviewed the security recordings last night. A pause. All of them. Every angle. Marcus said nothing. We have a question, the Serathi said. Ask it, Marcus said. The Serathi's energy field crackled. Around them the hall was very quiet. Many delegations had stopped pretending to work and were simply listening. When the lights went out, the Serathi said slowly, you were already moving. You did not hesitate. You did not wait to understand the situation. You simply moved, directly to the correct location. Another pause. How? Marcus looked at the Serathi ambassador. He thought about the question. He thought about how to answer it in a way that would actually communicate something true. I had already been there, he said. In my head, before it happened. The Serathi was still. Explain. All morning I knew something was planned, Marcus said. I found the signs, so I spent the morning running through how I would do it, if I was the one planning it. Where I would put the distraction, where I would put the real team, what I would wait for, how I would move. He paused. When it started, I already knew where to go, because I had already been there. In the plan. Silence. You modeled the attack from the attacker's perspective, the Serathi said. Yes. Before the attack happened. Yes. The Serathi was quiet for a long moment. Their energy field was very still, unusual for Serathi. Stillness in a Serathi energy field meant deep processing. It meant something had landed heavily. We have studied security and military science for 4,000 years, the Serathi said finally. Their layered voice was careful, precise. We have databases on every known approach to threat assessment and protective operations. We have records from hundreds of species across the galaxy. Marcus waited. We do not have a record of this approach being used instinctively, the Serathi said, as a natural response, without training protocols or computational assistance. They paused. You did not calculate it. You felt it. Marcus thought about that. Yes, he said. I suppose so. The Serathi looked at him for a long moment. Then they said something that made Ambassador Voss, who had been listening quietly, go very still. We would like to propose a formal information exchange, the Serathi said, between the Serathi civilization and Earth, on the subject of human threat perception and protective instinct methodology. A pause. We believe we have much to learn. The hall was completely silent. The Serathi, 4,000 years old as a spacefaring civilization, one of the most advanced species in the galaxy, were proposing a knowledge exchange with Earth, a species that had been in space for barely a generation. Because of one human standing behind an ambassador's chair, Marcus looked at the Serathi ambassador. That is Ambassador Voss's decision, he said, not mine. The Serathi turned to Voss. Voss's pale blue face was completely calm, but his eyes were warm. We would be honored, he said quietly. Word of the Serathi proposal moved through the hall faster than anything had moved before. The Serathi did not ask to learn things. In 4,000 years of recorded history, the number of times the Serathi had formally requested an information exchange with a younger species could be counted on both hands of most beings in the room. It changed something. Definitively and permanently. There is a moment in every room, in every situation, when a thing that was one way becomes another way and cannot go back. The room does not announce this moment. It just happens. And afterward, everything is different. That was the moment. The Krath guards at the entrance stood differently for the rest of the afternoon. Straighter, more alert, as if they had been slightly embarrassed into better performance. The delegations that had laughed the loudest on the first day were now the quietest. They were not ashamed, or most of them were not. They were simply recalculating, rebuilding their understanding of what they had seen and placing it next to what they now knew. The young Mivari diplomat, the orange-feathered one who had asked Marcus about Earth 2 days ago, sat at his table and thought about what Marcus had said. We do. He had looked Earth up after that conversation, the way the Krath delegate had. He had read the same file. He had reached a similar conclusion. But now he added something to that conclusion. It was not just what humans had survived. It was what surviving had made them. What hundreds of thousands of years on a Deathworld had built, layer by layer, in the body and the mind, and the instinct of every human being. Something that could not be learned quickly. Something that could not be installed or programmed or trained into existence in a short time. Something that was simply there, in the bone and the blood and the quiet scanning eyes. He thought about that for the rest of the afternoon. The closing ceremony began at the 4th hour of the afternoon. The hall was arranged differently for the ceremony. The debate tables were moved to the sides. A long formal table was placed in the center, where the senior representative of each delegation would come forward in turn to sign the summit agreements. Behind each representative stood their delegation. Behind each delegation stood their guards. It was ceremonial. It was slow. It was meant to be witnessed. Ambassador Voss took his place at the signing table when the Velhari delegation was called. He signed with the careful precision he brought to everything, each character of his name placed exactly right, the pen moving in clean, deliberate strokes. Behind him Marcus stood. The hall watched, not just the signing. The hall watched Marcus, openly now, without the pretense of looking elsewhere. From every direction, eyes rested on the quiet human standing behind his ambassador with loose hands and moving eyes, the same as he had stood every day of the summit. The Krath delegate Vorruk, waiting for his turn at the table, looked at Marcus across the room. He thought about the first morning, about walking over to the small human with his guards behind him and his 9 feet of Krath history, and saying, "Little creature, you are the ambassador's pet?" He thought about what he had not known then, what none of them had known. He thought about what he knew now. He did not feel foolish exactly. The Krath did not do foolish, but he felt something, a recalibration, a shift in the internal record he kept of the world and how it worked and where different things belonged in it. He moved Marcus Cole's position in that record, significantly. When all the delegations had signed, the moderator called the summit to its formal close. There was applause, the various species-specific versions of it. The Krath struck their armored fists against their chests. The Serathi's energy fields flared briefly. The Mivari made a high, harmonic sound with their throat pouches. The Druvani clicked all 4 sets of fingers simultaneously. Then the moderator did something that was not in the formal program. She paused. She looked at her notes. She looked at the hall. And she said carefully, in Galactic Common, so that everyone could understand, "Before this summit closes, the Security Council of this hall has asked to make a formal acknowledgement." The hall quieted. Preva stepped forward from the side of the room. She was in her full security uniform, her 4 Druvani eyes steady. She held a data pad, but did not look at it. She had memorized what she wanted to say. "During the 3rd day of this summit," she said, "a coordinated attack was made against this hall and the delegates within it. The attack was planned in advance. It was professionally executed. It used our own security rotations and blind spots against us." She paused. "It was identified and stopped before a single delegate was harmed. By one individual, acting on observation made hours before the attack began, using no resources except his own perception and training." She looked across the hall at Marcus. "On behalf of the Grand Council Security Service," she said, "and on behalf of every delegation in this room, thank you." Marcus stood very still. He was not comfortable with this. Anyone watching his face would have seen it. A small tightening, a slight shift in his expression. He was not built for being thanked publicly. He was built for the quiet and the dark and the work that happened before anyone noticed anything had happened. But he stood and received it, because it was genuine, and because some things deserve to be received even when they are uncomfortable. He gave a small nod. The hall responded the way it had responded to Preva. The Krath struck their chests. The Serathi flared. The Mivari harmonized. The Druvani clicked. And then Vorruk did one more thing. He stepped forward from his position in the Krath delegation. He walked toward the center of the hall and every eye followed him. 9 feet of ancient Krath warrior, dark red and black armor covered in the marks of 11 wars won. He stopped in front of Marcus. He reached to his side. He unclipped the honor blade from his belt. The Krath guards behind him went absolutely still. Some of them had served with Vorruk for years. None of them had ever seen him remove that blade outside of combat. The honor blade was not a weapon. Not exactly. It was a history. It was everything a Krath warrior had done and survived and earned, carried on their body as physical proof. You did not give it away. You did not place it at someone's feet. There was exactly one situation in all of Krath tradition where that was done. One moment. One meaning. Vorruk placed the honor blade on the floor in front of Marcus. He straightened up. He looked at the human. His massive face was serious. Fully, completely serious, with no humor and no performance and no diplomatic calculation behind it. He spoke in Krath. His guard translated immediately for the room, voice low and urgent. This warrior has seen you. The Krath have seen you. You are not small. You were never small. We simply did not know how to measure you. He stepped back. Marcus looked down at the blade on the floor. He looked at it for a moment. Then he crouched down and picked it up. He held it carefully, correctly. He had done enough reading on Krath culture to know how an honor blade was held. Flat across both palms. A correct hold, a respectful hold. He stood up and held it out to Vorruk. Vorruk did not take it. It is yours, his guard translated. It is given, not lent. Marcus held the blade for a moment longer. Then he placed it carefully inside his jacket, close to his chest where it would be safe and protected. He looked at Vorruk. Thank you, he said, simple, direct, without performance. Vorruk gave the Krath nod, the full one, the deep one, the one that meant everything it meant, and walked back to his delegation. The hall was very quiet. Then the young Mivari diplomat stood up from his seat. Nobody had asked him to. It was not in any program or protocol. He simply stood. His orange feathers were fully extended, the Mivari sign of strong feeling, of something that mattered. He began making the Mivari harmonic sound. His delegation joined him. Then another delegation stood. Then another. One by one around the hall, delegations rose. The sounds they made were all different. Chest strikes and energy flares and clicks and harmonics and a dozen other things, all different, all from different histories and different worlds and different ways of understanding the universe, but all meaning the same thing. Ambassador Voss stood beside Marcus as the hall filled with sound. He did not look at Marcus directly. He looked at the room, at the 300 species standing and making their sounds, at the golden light above them and the dead star floor below, and the flags of everyone who had come here from every corner of the galaxy. I told you, Voss said quietly, beneath the sound of the room. They would not laugh by the end. Marcus said nothing for a moment. He looked at the room, at the Krath striking their chests, at the Serathi flaring their fields, at the small Mivari with his orange feathers fully extended, making his harmonic sound with his whole body. You knew this would happen, Marcus said. It was not quite a question. Voss was quiet for a moment. I knew what you are, he said. I knew what this summit would show them, if they watched carefully enough. He paused. I did not know about the attack. That was not planned. But you brought me for a reason, Marcus said. Yes, Voss said. Not just protection. No, Voss said. Not just protection. Marcus thought about this. You wanted them to see. I wanted them to understand, Voss said gently. There is a difference. Seeing is easy. Understanding takes longer. He looked at the room. Some of them will go home and think about what they saw here for years before they fully understand it. Some will understand it sooner, some already have. Marcus looked at Vorruk across the room. The Krath delegate was standing straight, hands at his sides, making the chest strike sound with his delegation. He was not looking at Marcus. He did not need to. He understood, Marcus said. Yes, Voss said. He did. A pause. Why does it matter? Marcus asked. That they understand. Voss turned and looked at him. His pale blue face was calm and old, and full of something that Marcus recognized. The same thing he had seen in the faces of people who had thought carefully about the world for a long time. Because we are new, Voss said simply. Earth is new. Humans are new, in the galaxy's eyes. New things are either threats or opportunities to the old powers. They are rarely taken seriously. He paused. Until they are? Marcus said nothing. You did not just stop an attack yesterday, Voss said. You changed how 300 species think about your home. He looked at the room again. That is worth more than any treaty signed at this table. The hall was still full of sound, still standing, still showing, each in their own way, what they felt. Marcus stood in the middle of it, quiet, still, watching. He thought about Earth, about the gravity that had built his bones, about the air that had trained his immune system before he was born, about the long, hard history of a species that had started at the bottom of a Deathworld food chain and had simply refused to stay there. He thought about his mother, who had been a doctor in a city that flooded every few years and rebuilt every time, about his father, who had worked with his hands his whole life and had hands like machinery from it, about his grandmother, who had survived 3 things that should have killed her and had lived to be 94, and had said at the end that she had enjoyed it. He thought about persistence hunting, about the old way, about following and never stopping. He thought about 14 days in a field on a hostile world, about what it had taken to come home from that. He thought about all the humans who had come before him, all the ones who had looked at something impossible and had not run, who had picked up the thing in front of them, the blade, the problem, the darkness, the danger, and had carried it. He held the Krath honor blade carefully inside his jacket. He looked at the room full of 300 species learning something they would not forget. He breathed slowly, and for the first time in 4 days, the corner of Marcus Cole's mouth moved. Not just slightly, not just for a moment, a real smile. Small and quiet, and full of something deep, because he thought his grandmother would have liked this. The hall eventually quieted. The delegation sat. The moderator formally closed the summit. Delegates began moving toward each other for the private conversations that always followed a formal closing. The real conversations, the ones that happened when the ceremonies were done. Many of them moved toward the Vilhari table. Not just to speak with Ambassador Voss, though many did, but to be near the table, to be near Marcus, to stand in the general area of a being they had spent 3 days misunderstanding and 1 day learning to see correctly. The young Mivari came first. He walked over with his orange feathers still partially extended and stood in front of Marcus with his enormous eyes. He did not say anything sophisticated. He did not say anything diplomatic. He said, "I am going to tell everyone when I go home." Marcus looked at him. "Tell them what?" The young Mivari thought about it. "That I met a human," he said, "and that I was wrong about what that meant." Marcus looked at him for a moment. Then he nodded. "That is a good thing to tell them." The young Mivari nodded back, very seriously, and went back to his delegation. Later, as the hall emptied and the day moved toward evening, Preva found Marcus near the west exit, the sealed one, the one that still had the new cameras above it. She stood beside him and looked at the door. "They found the people who planned it," she said. "Overnight team made the connection, a faction that did not want the summit to succeed, did not want certain agreements signed." "I know," Marcus said. "They are in custody." She paused. "All of them, including the ones who were not here." She glanced at him. "Our team is good when they know what to look for." "Yes," Marcus said. "They are." Preva was quiet for a moment. She looked at the sealed ceiling above the exit. "I have been a security officer for 11 years, she said. "I have worked 6 major summits. I have worked with guards from 40 different species." She paused. "I have never seen what you did yesterday, the seeing of it, hours before." Marcus said nothing. "How do you train for that?" she asked, not demanding, genuinely asking. Marcus thought about it for a long moment. He thought about how to explain something that had never been fully explained to him either, something he had simply built, over years, the way you build anything. One piece at a time, one experience at a time. 1 day in a field and 1 night in a corridor and 1 summit in a hall made of dead star stone. "You learn what normal looks like," he said finally. "In every place you go, you learn what normal is. The sounds, the movements, the patterns. You learn it so well that when something is not normal, even something very small, you feel it before you see it." Preva listened. "Then you learn not to talk yourself out of what you feel," Marcus said. "That is the harder part. The mind wants to explain things away, wants to say it is probably nothing. The training is learning to stay with the feeling long enough to find out what it is." Preva was quiet for a moment. That sounds simple. It sounds simple, Marcus agreed. It is not. She nodded slowly. She looked at the door one more time. Then she held out one of her 4 hands. Marcus shook it. Safe travels, Marcus Cole, she said. You too, he said. She walked away down the corridor, back to her work, back to the endless, careful job of keeping complicated places safe. Marcus stood at the sealed west exit for one more moment. Then he turned and walked back into the hall to find his ambassador. The last thing that happened on the 4th day was small. As the Velhari delegation prepared to leave, cases packed, papers organized, the careful process of ending a summit and beginning the journey home, a message arrived for Ambassador Voss. He read it. His expression did not change, but he read it twice, which was unusual for him. He handed the datapad to Marcus without a word. Marcus read it. It was from the Galactic Species Database, an official notice sent to all registered species representatives, effective immediately by unanimous decision of the Grand Council Security Classification Board. Earth, Homo sapiens threat assessment level has been updated. Previous classification, low, emerging species, no significant threat profile. New classification, recognized, apex biological species, Deathworld origin, full diplomatic standing. Note appended by the Serathi civilization representative. This reclassification is recommended not as a warning, but as an acknowledgement. Homo sapiens should be understood not as a threat to the galactic community, but as a significant and serious member of it. They have earned this standing. We suggest all species update their understanding accordingly. Marcus read it once. Then he handed the datapad back to Voss. Voss tucked it into his case. He picked up his things. He walked toward the exit of the Grand Council Hall, and Marcus walked beside him. Slightly behind, slightly to the right, the same position as always. At the main entrance, the Krath guards stepped aside as they passed, not because protocol required it, because they wanted to. Outside, the 2 moons of Velzara were rising early, filling the sky with heavy silver light. The air was cold and clean and very quiet. Ambassador Voss walked toward the transport that would carry them to the Velhari ship. He walked with the same calm, unhurried step he always used. Marcus walked beside him. And behind them, through the great doors of the Grand Council Hall, 300 species were going home carrying something they had not brought with them. A new understanding. Of a small planet in a quiet corner of the galaxy. Of the creatures that lived there. Of what it meant, truly, fully, in the deep and serious way that meanings last, to come from a death world. And to be in the middle of a galaxy full of giants completely and absolutely unafraid. End.